Okay, I think we are live at this moment, and hoping that there will be people who will be joining in. Uh, I am trying to see if there's video production on the YouTube. Yes, I think we have video. Okay, so shall we start, sir?
Yes, very good.
Yeah. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. This is a, a live stream, a discussion with Dr. Koenraad Elst, a renowned historian, spent a lot of time in India studying uh, Indian history, and right now based in Belgium, shares his wisdom and knowledge with the rest of the world, whoever wishes to ask. Without further ado, I would invite Dr. Koenraad Elst into this meeting, and we could start the discussion in earnest. The topic of the discussion is the myths of the Mughals that has been perpetuated over generations, and we keep hearing a lot of things. So I thought it will be a good idea to ask Dr. Elst what he makes of these myths, how much of it is true, how much of it is made up, and some of it probably spun around. So the idea is to educate people on what's the right correct picture. So here it goes. Welcome, sir.
Yes, namaste.
Namaste,
Let me
sir.
explain first of all something about your welcoming sentence. You welcome people with good morning, good evening, good afternoon, good night, because they can be anywhere around the globe.
That's right.
So in your little empire, the sun never sets. And incidentally, I like everybody to know that the phrase "in my empire the sun never sets" was started by Charles V, who was the emperor of Spain, Austria, and the Low Countries, as well as the Americas and the Philippines
Hmm.
in 1520 or thereabouts.
Okay.
And so later it was then appropriated by the British Empire, which was also present all around the globe. And so now it's very appropriate to apply the same phrase to your program.
Thank you.
Right.
Thank you. By Charles, you mean Charlemagne, as we know him.
No, 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 no. That was that was another Charles.
Ah,
That
okay.
was in 800 AD. Here is about 1550 AD.
Okay. Okay.
Right.
Okay.
Anyway.
Great. Thanks a lot for the small, let's say, trivia. Uh,
Yep.
okay. So as I introduced the topic, the myths of the Mughals. There are quite a few things that are floating around. We will not have time for everything today. We have 1 hour. We have started exactly on time, and we hope to finish on time. I know you have to attend another call,
Hmm.
so we will try to finish it by 5:30. But as I said, we cannot go through everything, so we will try to focus on some of the most important ones. Lately, there was a big debate on Twitter, which I was following, where people made big claims about the contribution of Mughals towards the economy of India. A lot of people claimed that India was enriched by the Mughal invasion and the governance and the regime of the Mughals. Uh, to what extent is this true? Because we already know that India was economic superpower earlier than that. Uh,
Mhm.
but I will let you elaborate to what extent is this true?
Right. Well, in the ancient period, India was definitely the world's number one, ahead of China and far ahead of the Roman Empire, let alone the present day important European countries. So you see, India didn't need any Islamic or anyone else's influx. They were already the biggest. You see, and China kept growing. This has to do with very primitive basic data like the climate. You see, in India, the climate was very welcoming. And so there was not much of a hurdle. If you wanted to set up a business and so on, you could easily do it. In China, you had to conquer the cold, in Europe and so on.
Mhm.
The circumstances were a bit more difficult. So it's logical that economic development starts in a place like India, then gradually it spread. But still, you see, India had more than a quarter of the gross domestic product in antiquity already before the Muslim period.
Mhm.
So there was little that the Muslims could add. I'd like to make a little distinction within the Muslim, the period of Muslim rule. First we have a period of conquest with a lot of to and fro, where Hindus fight back, starting in 712 with the occupation of Sindh by Muhammad bin Qasim.
Yeah.
According to Pakistan, he's the real founder of Pakistan.
Right.
And so then, in Sindh, West Punjab, and so on, Hindus are fighting back, but gradually they are losing ground.
Mhm.
Like when Muhammad Ghori conquers Delhi and then his lieutenants conquer the whole Gangetic plain, he starts his campaign from Lahore. So at that point already it was firmly in Muslim hands.
Right.
Then from 1206 you get the Sultanate. The Sultanate was a very cruel regime, also for the Muslim elites who kept on murdering one another.
Mhm.
Like, a famous detail about that regime is that normally in imperial harems in China and in many other places, you see the harem women have a rivalry with each other to make their own son become the heir
Right.
to the throne.
Yeah.
Now, in the Sultanate, it was just the reverse because they knew the day one of the princes becomes known as the heir, everybody will try to kill
Kill him.
him as
Mhm.
well as his family.
Press. Yes.
And so it was a really cruel regime, and especially to its subjects. In terms of economy, it changed a lot less than the British would later do, because there was no civilizational distance. I mean, I don't mean to say that the British were superior to the Hindus, not at all, but they had a certain advantage in economic technology.
Right.
They brought certain new things that gave them an advantage, whereas the Muslims didn't do that.
Mhm.
You see, Hinduism was very advanced. In Arabia, they looked at India as a proverbially rich and progressive country. In fact, that's, for instance, why you have a girl's name called Hind.
Yes.
Hind means India.
Yeah.
Now, you see, it's typical to name girls after something rich, something opulent. Like, for
Something
instance,
grand. Yeah.
in English, we say Kimberly as a girl's name. Now, Kimberly is a diamond mine in South Africa.
Right.
So, natural riches, that's for a girl's name. Now, Hind was naturally rich.
Yes.
So, again, you see, the Muslim invaders couldn't add anything to that.
So
And
just
so, what they did
to
do,
add to that
yeah,
is that in the Sultanate period, with the constant turmoil, I mean, the lifespan of a sultan at that time in Delhi was probably not more than 5 years or even lesser, because I do remember that a lot of them were assassinated by
yeah.
rivals. So there was hardly anybody who was ruling for more than 5 or 10 years.
Hmm.
And that also, begs the question: did people, or Kutubuddin Aibak, which I remember he ruled mostly for 12 years, of which I think 50% of the time was spent in warring.
Yeah.
with rivals. I was wondering how could he be responsible for building the Qutub Minar, which the foundation excavation itself would take many years, considering that the minar has to be I don't remember exactly how high, but considering the height, the foundation itself has would excavation would take many years. So, what do you think of that? That's another myth of Kutubuddin
Mm,
building a minar there for call of azan. Uh, how practical is
right,
that?
but there was a sufficient unity of purpose among the Muslim elites. You see, they were they were individual enemies, but nevertheless they were all part of Muslim rule over pagan India.
Hmm.
And so in these Islamic building projects, there was sufficient unity of purpose, even if a king who started the building got killed, his successor would continue it. That is not so much an issue.
Hmm.
You know, what is typical for that period is a very strong oppression of the Hindus,
Yeah.
who had to, of course, pay jizya, the toleration tax, who also suffered from punitive land taxes. Like Alauddin Khilji is famous for that, for really imposing very harsh taxation on the Hindu peasants.
So one question again on that aspect, because this is something
Yeah.
that I am not able to reconcile and had discussions with others. That the Sultanate rulers were very much connected in or ruled from Delhi, and even Qutbuddin Aibak's capital was in Lahore. He did not shift his capital from
Mm,
there to Delhi. So that also begs the point that why would he build the entire Qutub Minar in the middle of nowhere where he cannot have control. But that's besides the point. That's one point. But we will not dive into that. You just mentioned, anyways, elaborated on that. But looking at the power center in Delhi, if they had the power center in Delhi or somewhere in Punjab, uh, were they really able to control every corner of India, or were they only levying taxes on the local rajas? Which basically means, what I want to drive home is that they really never controlled directly most of India, and they only
yeah.
threatened with their armies that if you don't pay us amount yearly amount, I forget the name for it, but we would come and collect it.
Yeah, of course. That is true even in the British period. You see, the British were already a lot more modern. They had railways to go everywhere and so on.
Yeah.
Yet, even then, a very large part of the rural population had never seen a Britisher in his life by the time of independence. You see, so yeah, that is true, and that is even more true in the Sultanate period, of course. But macroeconomically, we can say a few things about their effect on the Indian economy. So, for the Hindus who had to suffer it all, it was not pleasant, but they didn't change too much in the structure of the economy and particularly of agriculture.
Hmm.
So, to a very large extent, it simply continued. Only they had to pay higher taxes, which once in a while caused famines. And famines then cause mass death.
Yeah.
Now, of course, this is a very difficult thing to handle for historians because you have to make a distinction. Sometimes famines just happen because of meteorological circumstances, and sometimes you can see the human hand behind it. And so this has all to be detailed very seriously. Obviously, they had a negative effect. That is very certain.
Okay. Uh, 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 the then why is it that in our school books we always get to see these maps of the Sultanate period,
Hmm.
whole swaths of India colored or shaded grey as the empire of the Tughlaqs or the
Yeah.
empire of the Sultanate. They, because as you said, they did not directly control it. They just controlled part of Delhi or
Hmm.
ruled from Punjab. Why would this myth be created that the Sultanate was ruling? Because this is probably the first myth we need to talk about. Why would anybody create such maps
Well,
and feed this to as part of our education in schools?
yeah, but you see that could be said of any ancient empire. You see, the hold from the capital over the entire country was only limited. So what they did first of all was to prevent any other power from coming up. Like you see, they could perhaps, in some cases, leave a local ruler in place as long as he paid tribute,
Yes.
because then they could, direct their attention to more contentious areas. But that's rule for all practical purposes.
Hmm.
I mean, a modern state, of course, has a far deeper control over the lives of the people. Any modern democracy has a far bigger role for the state, for the authorities, than any ancient monarchy or dictatorship. Because the practical means of control have increased so much. Now with the internet, it's enormous. We
Mhm.
haven't seen the last of it.
Right.
But so that's normal. You see that control is only limited. So yeah, I mean, you could explore this. You see, to what extent did Hindus still have a free hand? Fact is that Hindu culture in the countryside completely continued.
Mhm.
So they had to pay, and I mean, otherwise they had to pay to some local Maharaja, and perhaps that would be less, but in principle, it was the same thing. So in that sense, you see, for the locals, not much change except in the cities.
Okay. So is this one of the reasons that not lately, but in the previous generation or so, Indians were quite indifferent towards politics because whether it was
Yeah,
it doesn't matter who was ruling them, whether it was the Mughals, the British, or any other political party later after freedom, it didn't really matter as long as they were able to get a job and they were able to do their stuff. They didn't care.
yeah, but here the Muslim rule made a big difference because before that, India stands out in the world as a place where wars didn't affect the civilian population.
Hmm.
I mean, you could be plowing your field, and 1 mile from there, a battle would be raging,
Hmm.
and it wouldn't affect you in the least. This happened a lot. Whereas in the Muslim period, wars are far more intrusive into people's lives.
Total war.
So so that's definitely a difference. And so the economic and social damage caused by wars is far more profound than in the preceding period.
Okay. So, continuing on the same thought, what is then uh, the enrichment, economic enrichment? We'll go to the cultural part later. But what is the economic enrichment that any of these Mughal sovereigns would have brought to India? Because there is a lot of claim that Indians became prosperous, India became prosperous. Did really India become prosperous, or it was the emperor who became, prosperous?
Well, the regime became prosperous, and this is shown still today by their buildings, like the Taj Mahal.
Mm,
So that cost a lot of tax money.
mm,
So the emperor built that, or had Hindu craftsmen build it.
mhm,
But he spent a lot of tax money on it. Incidentally, to take the example of the Taj Mahal, Aurangzeb was a bit of a rebel against his father,
mm.
Shah Jahan, the one who built the
Taj
um,
Mahal. Yeah.
the Taj Mahal, and so he was a pretty ascetic person. You see, I know that many Hindus have a very negative opinion about Aurangzeb. That is misplaced. They should have a negative opinion about Islam itself,
Hmm.
because Aurangzeb was not a very bad man. I mean, of course, he locked up his father, he killed his brother, and so on. That's still bad enough. But nevertheless, on the whole, it could have been far worse. And so, if he demolished thousands of temples, if he persecuted Hindus, that's not because he was a bad man.
Hmm.
You see, he was also a very ascetic person. Like he didn't want payment for himself from the state exchequer.
Okay.
And he criticized his father for lavishly spending public money, right?
Hmm.
So, he was ascetic, he was frugal. And, this is not to say, oh, yeah, he was partly a good man, he was frugal and so on, and partly a bad man because he persecuted Hindus. No, no. The two phenomena stem from the same urge. He was a devout Muslim. And so he thought, as a devout religious man, he should be ascetic. He should limit his worldly desires.
Okay.
And at the same time, as a man of Islam, he should fight for Islam and persecute unbelievers. Right. Anyway, so this is only to make the point that the state took a lot of initiative in building Islamic buildings. So that is true. Now, of course, before that, less the state, but more private initiatives like temples. They did a lot of building. They took a lot of cultural initiatives and so on, which they were less and less capable of doing.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, if they had been destroyed, but also otherwise, with land being taken from them and so on, which continued during the secularist regime. But so there was a lot more private initiative, and much of what was built before the Islamic period, unfortunately, we don't have anymore. It's just not there anymore.
Right.
But so in that field, Islam has not contributed anything. I mean, there were nice buildings built by Muslim rulers, but then before that, there were nice buildings built by Hindus.
Yes.
So there's nothing gained. And if you look at Hindu buildings like Elephanta, like the Meenakshi temple and so on, they're so bright, they're so great. There's really little that Islam could do to better that. Like all these geometrical designs
Yes.
on mosques and so on, they have something charming. At the same time, well, compared to all the murtis made by Hindus, they are a bit like wallpaper design.
That
They're
that
very simple and repetitive.
that,
And
that is
so
how.
I don't consider them progress. India did not need that.
Yeah. Exactly. So we will touch upon that. Before that, I want to make one observation that I noted. I visited Spain and south of Spain, where there are a lot of Moorish buildings, and they have been repurposed by later Christian kings. But the construction and the interior decoration has remained. And as you correctly said, there are a lot of geometric designs. On closer inspection, what I found was they were all made of plaster, and of course the guide did tell us that they were all made of plaster of Paris. And they were repetitive all over the building, and I could make out that they were molds. They were molds where they casted these geometric designs in plaster of Paris, let it dry, and then they stuck it to the wall, and then they painted over it. So it was not the labor of love that one would have in the murtis, or the temple architectures, or the various other buildings that were built. So I realized that this is templatized molds that were used to, it's a day's work. You could do the whole building, with enough labor. So
since we're talking about cultural achievements,
no, just sticking with still sticking with the economic part.
What they always say on Twitter and so on is that the Muslims gave us universities and all kinds of. Now that's not true at all. On the contrary, they destroyed the universities that existed.
Yes.
The first university in the world was Takshashila, Vedic University. I mean, sometimes Buddhists claim, or it is claimed by secularists on behalf of Buddhism, that Buddhism created the first university. This is not true.
Mm-hmm.
The Buddha himself had several friends who had studied in Takshashila University, which already existed in his own day,
right?
Which had famous teachers like Panini. So
even
it's definitely a Vedic invention.
Even Kautilya studied was a professor, teacher, student, and a teacher there. And this was around the time when Alexander invaded India.
Right. But then later, the Buddhists, of course, also built many universities. And so the contribution of Islam to those universities is that it destroyed them.
Mm.
It burned them down, all the books, all the buildings, and all the inmates. So compared to that, again, there was nothing of progress that Islam could offer.
So what is
So they did not start universities. They started their own madrasas and so on, this Islamic theological learning, okay, but nothing progressive, nothing scientific.
So what is it that the Mughals brought to India as part of their, besides religion that they brought along with them? Did they bring some new way of doing agriculture, new irrigation system technology? Did they bring a better calendar calculation
mhm,
for better more accurate calendar, or the science of building roads which lasted the last monsoon. Uh, so
mhm.
did they do any of these things that we should be aware about?
Well, I don't know much about the agricultural techniques, frankly. So there might be something there, though I'm not aware of it. As for calendar, that I know quite well. Now, they had a different calendar system, and so that did not influence the Hindu calendar system.
Hmm.
They were just separate, and the Islamic one was not better, but it was different, and they existed side by side,
Okay.
as they still do. Um,
So it did not
now,
really make a difference to the local population. It did not enrich the local life. The calendar.
no,
It just was for their prayers and for the festivals, Muslim Islamic festivals. It was convenient. It helped them in that.
right,
Right. Okay.
but
Going going back to your one previous point where Aurangzeb scolded his father or whatever,
yeah,
derided his father for spending public money. uh, where was this money spent on besides building? I mean, you could build only that much, and we know there are a handful of buildings in and around Delhi, uh, which are that are attributable to the Mughals. There were four
mhm.
or five important emperors. Where did all this money go? What did they do with it?
Yeah, I don't think that that is very different with the previous regime, in the sense that out of the state exchequer, they maintained quite an Islamic establishment. But before that, Maharajas would give donations to temples and so on. So I mean that the amount of public money spent on religion has probably not changed much, except that now, of course, it was used for Islam and not for, and if possible, against Hinduism. But if you look at it from a secular distance, I think the amount spent on religion was not very different.
Hmm. So there were no great public buildings because I do not remember any hospitals being built. And
Ah, right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Those things, yeah, socially useful buildings. Again, there was certainly no progress. I mean, temples did all those things. This was not done by the state, though in the Arthashastra, it is also listed among a king's duty to do these things. But effectively, mostly they were done by temple establishments, so privately, but they were done. And I mean, India has quite a proud history in medicine, and particularly also in public medicine. So again, Islam came too late in the day to change that.
okay, okay. I was just interacting with some of the people on Twitter to see if they had any questions. Nothing yet, but we'll continue. So, why is then this myth being created of uh, that this was a period of great renaissance for India, or a great rise?
Yeah, well, partly it may be because of ignorance, because about ancient India we have fewer sources than about the Middle Ages. I mean, if I try to put a positive spin on it, it may be that they may ignore to some extent the achievements of ancient India. Like if you read medieval sources, you may get the impression that probably in the 16th century, the Grand Trunk Road was created.
Mm-hmm.
Now, already it existed in the ancient period, linking Patna or Pataliputra with Kandahar.
Mm-hmm.
And so that road already existed, and maybe Sher Shah Suri in the early Mughal period may have contributed something to that, done repairs or whatever. And so the road has gotten associated with him, but it existed much, much longer. I mean, it's also true in religion. Like if you say, Islam brought charity, brought the habit of fasting and so on. No, of course not. All these things already existed, both the good things and the bad things. Like, for instance, female circumcision existed in Africa in some tribes already. and Islam only institutionalized that. So you could say they didn't invent it. No, but they made it Islamic by practicing it. Same thing with the pilgrimage to Mecca, that already existed.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, Muhammad could become important in Arabia because he lived in the city that saw people coming from all over Arabia every year. And, fasting exists in every religion, charity exists in every religion. So none of that is new. The only thing new in Islam is the person of Muhammad. Otherwise it's nothing special. So they were just too late to bring anything new. Like the same in science. But looking at it from Europe, with the European history I studied in school, you get the impression that a lot of contributions were made by the Arabs.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not true. The Arabs passed on knowledge that they themselves had from the ancient Greeks, as also from the Indians and the Chinese.
Correct. Once I had
And
a
so,
lively debate with a local European friend of mine, where I told him about the number system that we use today, and zero, everything originated and invented in India, and he was not ready to believe till of course I had to pull out Google, Wikipedia, and show it to him, and
mhm.
then he was a bit dumbstruck for nearly a few hours because he had to go through the whole thing, and he was awestruck maybe, but okay,
Yeah.
good. So this let's say the myths that is created in our school books, what purpose do they serve by creating this narrative of greatness of this period?
Right. So I could understand that some people who do not know much about his history can, get the wrong idea for innocent reasons. But in secular India, it very much serves a political purpose, which is to make Hindus grateful and indebted and even feeling guilty towards Islam. Islam had bestowed so much good on them that they ungratefully didn't appreciate enough, and so on. I mean, that narrative of belittling Hinduism and extolling Islam, that's very much part of the Nehruvian worldview.
Mm-hmm.
And, that only has gotten intenser over the years. A really important turning point is around 1970 when Indira Gandhi needed the support of the communists for her intra-Congress power struggle. And so the deal effectively was that, okay, you Congress people, Sanjay Gandhi and so on, you can take all the positions, everything public, all the perks of power, you can have those, but you leave to us communists the power over the cultural and educational sector. Because they knew, just like the missionaries do, that those sectors control the future. And so they went for that and they really changed the face of India in terms of the narrative that was told to everyone, both through the school books, through Bollywood, through the cultural sector.
Hmm.
And so there the purpose was to belittle Hinduism and to convince Hindus themselves that they wouldn't lose much if they outgrew Hinduism. And we can see now that this really has worked to quite an extent. Hindus growing up today are far less Hindu, far less conscious of Hinduism, far less knowledgeable about Hindu traditions than the previous generations.
That's right. I completely agree with that. And one of the objectives I have, and a lot of people that I know, is directed towards rekindling this connection with our culture, with our tradition. Uh,
Mhm.
on the front of on this point uh, on the cultural part, there is a lot of claim that the Ganga Jamuni Tehzeeb, and so the great
Yes.
syncretic culture emerged out of this.
Mhm.
So did we really need it? Were we dying without it?
Not, not at all. And in fact, some limited parts of India have never had Muslim rule or only very limited in a very short period, and they are not lacking in anything.
Yeah.
So, no, of course, you didn't need that. But you see, from an Islamic viewpoint, it was something of a step forward. You know, Akbar started this Dini Ilahi,
Mm-hmm.
meaning the divine religion,
Right.
and so effectively he was an apostate from Islam. He could not be too open about that, functioning within an Islamic establishment. But to some people, it was already clear enough that he wasn't serious about Islam anymore. Anyway, he managed to just do it right so that he could get away with it. And then, as a symbol of this new religion, he built the city of Allahabad,
Mm-hmm.
the divine city, was the city of the divine religion, and he built that on the confluence of the Ganga and the Yamuna.
But wasn't
So,
Prayag already there?
well, Prayag left open the area closest to the actual confluence. So yes, Prayag was there, and in fact, some of the neighborhoods that grew together to form the city of Prayag existed already before the Vedas.
Right.
That is where Ila, the ancestress of the Vedic rishis, lived.
Hmm.
So it was already there for a very long time. But so the fortifications and so on are robust. Let's say a typically Muslim city was built by Akbar to symbolize the confluence of Islam and Hinduism.
Mm-hmm.
That's ultimately how he conceived his new made up religion. So that was there. Now this name of confluence of Ganga and Yamuna has been used by many people who wanted to bring them together, who were sincere to various extents. Like you have Dara Shikoh, the brother of Aurangzeb, murdered by Aurangzeb,
Yeah.
who, for all we can say from his writings, probably really meant it to bring Islam together with the best in Hinduism.
Mm-hmm.
You find this later in the Brahmo Samaj and so on, Mahatma Gandhi. And so, with different levels of understanding, this remained an ideal. Now, the mistake about that, you see, even if you really go for the best in Islam, now even then, none of that is needed. You see, all the values that you might find good in Islam exist within Sanatana Dharma. So it's a compromise. It's a sort of acceptance of the fact that Islam has arrived in India,
Mm-hmm.
but strictly speaking, is not necessary at all.
Yeah, because a lot of people make a big virtue out of this, that gaining the syncretic culture was a big win for India, and this is something a lot of secularists or liberals belabor this point. Uh,
Yes, you see, I have a standard comparison for this psychology. You may have learned long ago that 1 plus 1 equals 2.
mm-hmm.
All right?
Mm-hmm.
So Sanatana Dharma says that 1 plus 1 equals 2. Then, comes in with a lot of fanfare and a lot of violence, Islam, and that says 1 and 1 equals 4. Now, all these Ganga Yamuna Tehzeeb people, they say, no, 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 that's extremist. No, no, 1 and 1 is 3. And so to us who maintain that 1 and 1 is 2, they say, you are a fanatic, you are an extremist.
Yes. So, in fact, I normally this is quite a sober analogy. The analogy I gave is the fact that yes, the Jamuni Tehzeeb is the child of a violent rape, and
Yeah,
and now
very good comparison.
the woman is
Yes,
being asked to adopt it, and as if nothing happened, and live with it. So this is how
right.
I see the syncretic culture, and this is how
Hmm.
I give this analogy. A lot of people, of course, don't like it because it's too radical in its view. But I think
Hmm.
yours is also pretty good. You could use that. Coming to Akbar, who is the great knight in shining armor for the secularists. Among all the 4 or 5 emperors, he at least they at least say, okay, here is, again, this is the 1 plus 1 is equal to 3 kind of a formula. that okay,
Mhm.
all of them were not so good, but like, here is Akbar who basically made up for the rest. Um,
Yeah.
so, what is the truth about this guy? We
Well,
hear that he was.
he started as a jihadi. You see, at I think 13 years of age,
Hmm,
he was already made the emperor, but effectively it was his general Bayram Khan
right.
who won the war against the king of Delhi for a very brief period, 2 weeks or so. There was this Hema Chandra, Hindu king of Delhi.
Yeah.
So he lost out against Bayram Khan effectively, and so Bayram Khan made his nominal employer, namely Akbar, wield the sword to chop off his head. Which made him into a ghazi, that is to say, a mujahid who has, with his own hands, killed a kafir.
Hmm,
So he had a very very proper Islamic education,
mhm,
but he outgrew that. He sent Bayram Khan away. I mean, he didn't kill him or anything, but he promoted him away. He sent him on pilgrimage to Mecca and so on, get him out of the way. And so he started a policy of compromise with the Hindus. And so, Hindus were not really equal, but sufficiently equal not to rise in revolt.
hmm,
So he had a stable empire. And so, from a Muslim viewpoint, it was perhaps not good enough, not Islamic enough. But from an emperor's viewpoint, it was a very good move. Because you see, all the Sultanate kingdoms had always been plagued by revolts, not only internal quarrels between the Muslim rulers, but revolts from the Hindu populace. And so this was quietened to a large extent. Some of the Rajputs still revolted, but on the whole, it was a stable empire that he created. And even though his son and grandson started nibbling away at it,
mhm,
it remained in place, it remained successful until the early days of Aurangzeb.
hmm.
Then Aurangzeb spoiled it all by becoming fanatic again, because that really made the Hindus rise in revolt. Then we get Shivaji, we get the Jat revolt, the Rajput revolt,
The Sikh revolt.
and yes, so and that of course is also admitted by Aurangzeb. At the end of his life, he felt sorry for what he had done,
Hmm,
not because he had suddenly become compassionate with these accursed infidels, but because he had jeopardized the stability of a mighty Muslim empire. And so that he really has done. And so from then on, it has never recovered.
yeah.
Then the Marathas and so on, and the British start nibbling away at the empire until by the time of the mutiny, it was a complete shadow of itself,
Right.
with the emperor not collecting taxes but receiving a pension from the British. And so that was I mean, that retroactively proved the correctness of Aurangzeb's approach. Of Akbar's approach.
Right.
You see, Akbar made a compromise with the Hindus sufficient that they could live with, and he allowed the temples to come up again and so on. And so, by scrapping that compromise, Aurangzeb jeopardized the stability of the empire.
Right. So, uh, what what caused the this compromise? What made Akbar get into this compromise with the Hindu Rajputs, especially with the Rajputs, because they were the dominant force in the
Yeah,
north and they were right next door. Um,
yeah. Well, I think it is simply a correct assessment of the power equation. He saw that, after centuries of Muslim rule, they didn't manage to set up a stable Muslim empire, and so he tried to achieve that by this compromise.
okay, so he did feel a lot of heat from the Rajputs right
Yes,
next door,
exactly.
and he felt
Yeah,
that.
yeah. It's not by Gandhian methods that Hindus asserted themselves.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
It is not by Mahatma Gandhian methods that Hindus asserted themselves. They showed they
Yeah.
were strong, they were to be feared, and
Yeah.
so therefore Akbar sued for a compromise.
Okay. Yeah, I think that also did the empire a lot of good because I think most of the Indian campaigns were mostly fought by Rajputs.
Yes.
The southern campaigns and the eastern campaigns were fought by Rajputs, and not
Yeah, yeah, Akbar made a joke about it. Seeing how Rajputs were fighting against Rajputs in one of his battles,
yeah.
he exclaimed, "Look, unbelievers wielding the sword of Islam."
Interesting, interesting. Okay. Uh, uh, Around the time when Akbar came to power, and then probably then his son Jahangir, and then Shah Jahan.
Hmm.
Uh, at that time, Europe was in the middle of its renaissance.
Yes.
Uh, Scientific thinking came about. I think a lot of
Hmm.
Europeans did visit the court of Shah Jahan, maybe even Jahangir.
Yes.
I do not know if any European visited Akbar. Maybe some Jesuit priests, but
Some Jesuits, yes.
not scientists or politicians. But we do know that during Shah Jahan, there were businessmen, entrepreneurs
Yes.
who came here. Uh, did all of this not have any impact on the emperors here, because they never started any universities, they did not uh, bring about any kind of change in education, they did not adopt obviously Hindu education
Hmm.
for whatever reason. There was no education that they could bring from Islam besides theology, uh, and they did not invite Western thinking or thought processes or scientific thinking. No universities, colleges, nothing. Why was that? Why were they so insular?
Well, part of the reason is not very ideological. It's simply that emperors of a big empire tend to consider themselves the center of the world and are not very interested in what is happening in the rest of the world. You see the same thing in China to some extent, like under the Ming Dynasty,
Mhm.
which was quite prosperous, saw a lot of demographic and economic growth of China. But they were also insular. There was this Zheng He who organized a big fleet to Africa,
Mhm.
bringing back camels and I mean giraffes and other African goods. And so, if that had been pursued, history would have been very different.
Mhm.
So the Chinese colonization of Africa that we see right now would have happened 500, 600 years ago. And then the history of European colonization would have been very different and so on. But you see, when one day Zheng He came back from one of his journeys, a new emperor had come to power,
Mhm.
and he stopped the whole expedition,
Okay.
and he demolished the ships and so on. So that is not that exceptional, although you have to say that a bit later, under the Qing dynasty, China did open to some extent to the rest of the world. Like, for instance, Ferdinand Verbiest, Flemish Jesuit,
Mhm.
he came to build cannon for the Chinese army. He reformed the calendar.
Mhm.
See, and I mean, given the importance that the calendar has in pre-modern cultures, that is a very important concession to Western influences. So in the Islamic regimes, we don't see that at all. So there, I think another part of the explanation is the Islamic factor, that Islam, by definition, feels superior to the rest of mankind.
Okay. Okay. Understood. Uh, I think we have more or less covered most of the things that we have, and I see that we have 15 minutes to go.
Hmm.
Uh, and I am checking if there are any questions from the audience. We have around 6 people or 14 people viewing right now, but uh, I haven't seen any questions. I asked them to post questions.
Okay, then there's another point I want to make.
Sure.
It is often said that it is totally unfair and communal and so on to say that there was an Islamic colonization.
Mhm.
You know, um, when he came to power, Narendra Modi said famously that India had suffered 1200 years of slavery, and he was criticized very much from the secularists. Now, the the time frame, 1200 years, is a bit inaccurate. In Sind, it was more than 1300 years. In Tamil Nadu, it was only a few dozen years.
Mhm.
So there's a difference there. But what the really criticized point that he made was that colonization was not just the British and the Portuguese. It started already with the Muslim conquest.
Mm.
And that I think is very correct. First of all, to name it slavery. You see, in the case of the British, slavery would be a very unfortunate kind of metaphor because the British precisely abolished slavery in the Mughal Empire, as they also forced the Ottoman Empire to abolish slavery.
Yeah.
But of course, what they did instead, this economic exploitation, the demolition effectively of the Indian economy,
Mm.
was bad enough. I agree. But so that was colonization. But what happened previously was also colonization. You see, the Muslims who conquered India were based outside India, in Afghanistan, in Uzbekistan, but all of them lost their homeland
Mm.
soon enough. And they kept on trying to reconquer it. Because you see, these places, Samarkand and Kandahar and so on, they are some sort of oasis in a desert like landscape.
Mm.
They're very coveted and they're constantly fought over. And so once in a while, you see, you have it and then you lose it. And so they had nothing else but India. So they couldn't export any wealth from India to outside anymore. So that um, that brightens the picture a little bit because India would have seriously gone down during the Muslim period if there had been that old style colonization.
Mm.
But it's still colonization. Like, for instance, when in South Africa, the white regime had declared independence from the British, or the same thing in Rhodesia, Zimbabwe, it was still by the African freedom fighters, it was still considered colonization, but of the new type, where the ties with the motherland had been cut.
Mhm.
But for the locals, nothing changed. And so the same thing in India. Whether the capital was in Samarkand or in Delhi, for the Indians, nothing changed.
Yes, I think this is a very important point because a lot of secularists or the liberal types do point out that the British looted India and took the money out of India to England, whereas the Mughals did not do that. They kept the money in India. Uh,
Hmm.
and this point addresses that point, that question, or rather that argument. And to add to that, the looter stayed back, and they became the boss, and they continued looting and
Yeah,
enriched themselves and did not contribute anything back. To this, there are also some also other points that a lot of money was repatriated to their homeland. Uh, in some of it was in war effort. Some
hmm,
of it was to just donations to religious
yeah, of
places,
course.
and I think a lot of the uh, loot was in form of slave labor.
Of course.
Millions and millions of Indians were kidnapped and just transported to the Middle East and the Central Asian republics just for construction work.
Yeah,
And as you know, one of the reasons why the part of the Pamir range is known as the Hindu Kush, uh,
right,
simply because of the number of Hindus that were killed or died in that transport.
right.
Okay. I think with this, what we would like to do is to conclude the live stream today. Thanks a lot for joining us,
All right,
sir. We will find other occasions to again meet up. I would want to invite other people also to join this and not make this just a one way traffic or just two people talking. I would invite more people to join this and
mm,
enrich the conversation, and in fact would want to bring the other side of the conversation. I would in fact enlist your support. If you have people who you would want to debate with, I would like to invite them
all right,
and organize this debate so that there is also a picture that is presented from the other side, and you could probably throw in your rebuttals or let them do that. So would see who would be brave enough to take you on. and also to see if you have somebody you would want to debate, and we could invite him.
All right.
That we could do often.
Promise.
Okay.
Okay.
So thanks a
Namaste.
lot. Namaste, and have a nice remaining Sunday.
Thank you.
Thank you.